Hey, good morning. Welcome to the Stokastic.com NFL strategy show, tournament strategy. We're going over the Sims. I'll tell you the truth. I ran a bit of a unadulterated factory setting Sims this morning just to see what it would look like. I'm a little bit nervous because it's kind of exactly what I wanted it to look like. You know what I mean? And usually when like my two best weeks this season, I've run it. I've made a few adjustments, some tweaks to get a little bit up or down on certain guys. And I go, man, these lineups look insane. And those are my two best weeks. Whenever I've got lineups like this, it worries me a little bit, Greg.
Yeah, and just out of curiosity, because I did the same thing. I actually just kind of ran them. But the one thing I wanted to do, because I was just kind of interested, is because we have the new payout settings and the Sims tool. So we've got like a lot of different options now. We've got every 5% all the way up to 40% for different payout options to select. And the Millie Maker this week, it is 40% to first. It's a $2.5 million prize pool, $1 million to first. So incredibly top heavy. So I ran Sims on my computer, just checking what it would be with a really top heavy payout, mostly because I was curious how that might be a little bit different from like the slightly flatter settings that we use when we do this show. But what percentage to first did you do when you ran the settings?
I did 10.
Oh, okay. So
now I did 10 because there's a lot of people that are playing the play action or the first down or the mini max. And with that, 10, I do 10,000 and then 10% because I figured we would run 25 or 30. So I wanted to see if it looked any different.
Yeah, that was the same thing. So this is actually cool and interesting to me because I am interested to see what the differences are with me having run it at 40%, you having run it at 10%, and then Jacob having run it in between those two numbers for the purposes of the show. I don't think it's going to be like all of a sudden there's some player who's in like 1% of your lineups, it's in 20% of mine or anything like that. But I'm sure there will be little differences in terms of stack types or maybe some contrarian players that might pop up a little bit more in my lineups than did in yours.
Yeah. Well, let's do it. Let's do it, man. We got a lot to get into. We got 10 games. Man, I tell you, my favorite days of the week at this point are Sunday, Saturday, Wednesday, and Thursday because there's no football in the nights prior to that. I wake up, I'm just so tired. Plus, I sat down with you and I drank 4 beers after the show last night, and we were, I think you and me and Jordan talked to like 10:45 or something. So I wake up this morning, I hear the kids, I'm like, oh God. And then I had to get my 3-year-old for blood work at 8. She's in there freaking out. Anyway, no, Mark, it's 4 days of the week. It's the 4 days where there isn't night football the prior night. But anyway, let's get into it. 10 games, some high totals on this slate too. Really some high totals. I mean, Detroit, Minnesota is one of them. Seattle, Atlanta. Houston, Green Bay has real shootout potential. Carolina, Washington. This is not one of those slates where you just look at a game and go, I'm getting nothing. Probably the first time all season that there's not at least 2 games where you go, I'm just not interested at all.
Yeah, and I think this is also 2 weeks in a row the totals have been slightly higher, whereas earlier in the year we saw really low totals. I don't know if there's been some sort of change. Maybe there are offenses adjusting to the cover 2 defenses, but totals starting to creep up a little bit again after they've been on a decline the last few years.
They definitely are. All right, here we go. Clayton, did your kid call out the doctor's huge teeth? No, he was wearing a Bears sweatshirt though. And man, Bears fans are excited right now. He was stoked. This guy, I told him they're going to suck. They're not. They're good. They're good. He's finally got somebody. But let's go. Jay Ryan, sign into my phone, hit that like button, and now to the TV. Good stuff. Yeah, appreciate you guys. And we found out yesterday from the poll that Jordan ran, we had like 400 votes on it, that 70% of you were at work while watching the show. So appreciate those of you who are, appreciate those of you who aren't. Doesn't matter as long as you're here. And if you don't mind, take a single second, atone for your sins this morning. Hit that thumbs up. Please, goes a long way. We wouldn't ask you otherwise. It's just how the YouTube algorithm works. Subscribe to the channel. It's free. If you hate it, you can unsubscribe and never hear from us again. And leave a comment down below. I had a lot of comments on yesterday's show for that same reason. Leave a comment, try and read and respond to all of them. And we enjoy it. And thank you in advance. All right, let's do what we usually do. Take a quick look here at some of the lineups out of the gate, Greg. Then we can look at exposures and see what we're going with on this slate, because my assumption is even with a slightly higher payout, the first that we ran the Sims on, I think, is there any way we can zoom in a little bit, Jacob? Because I think it's going to be hard for people to see that on the screen.
Yeah, there we go. That's a little bit better.
Okay. I think it's going to be a lot of Dalton. There we go. Perfect. A lot of Dalton, a lot of Jaden Daniels, a lot of Kirk Cousins, and a lot of Geno, and probably a lot of Darnold. And when you and I did the single lineup sim on Wednesday, the couple spots we really wanted to try, we tried Dalton, we tried Jaden. I think we did try Darnold, but we ended up with a single stack. So we'll see where those are at today.
One thing that stands out to me, which doesn't surprise me, is we are getting to more of the triple stacks that we weren't seeing as much so far this year. It was something that we saw a lot last year. And it was one thing that you and I noticed right off the bat, the first couple of weeks of the season, that we weren't seeing it. And we came to the conclusion that there'd been so much value on slates this year, they didn't need those double and triple stacks as heavily to find upside. So we were getting to more like single and double stacks. But if you look at our top lineups here, it's almost all double and triple stacks with a lean a little bit more towards triple stacks. This is what is going to happen on slates that don't have a lot of value. In an attempt to try to find the lineups that have the most upside, the Sims are identifying lineups that really correlate heavily.
I think you're going to see a lot of it, and for the right reasons. Also, again, value is. I don't understand why DraftKings priced Garendo up to 6,600, but left Ty Chandler at 5,600. There's some of these spots where, like, if the starter ends up being out, there's just going to be significant value there. By the way, Nate said, "Good morning, fellas. Enjoying some pan-seared swordfish with avocado rice for lunch today." Sounds good. Are you eating lunch at 10 o'clock, or are you somewhere else in the world that it's lunchtime? Either way, sounds good. I don't know what avocado rice is, but
there's not a single thing he listed there that you would ever catch me eating.
Swordfish?
Yeah, fuck that. No.
Really? It's delicious. Are you not a sea? Like I'll eat any fish, any seafood, does not matter. Comes out of the ocean, I'll probably try it.
I can't deal with the smell.
Really?
It makes me this. So I assume I probably wouldn't like the taste, just because I know that like taste is like correlated to smell in some kind of way, but like the smell of it just makes me nauseous. Like I've been in a room with multiple times where I've just been in either a seafood restaurant or somebody orders seafood and it makes me throw up, just the smell of it.
That's crazy. There's a place in Margate, New Jersey. It's a Greek restaurant called Sophia, and they have grilled baby octopus. Now, some people have an issue with this because octopi are smart. It's the greatest thing I've ever had. It comes out as the full octopus too. The head, the tentacle, everything, Greg. The whole thing. Probably this big. The best seafood I've ever had. I assume you wouldn't try that.
No. But also, like, part of it is out of my control. Like, the smell just makes me nauseous.
It's a reflexive response. Would you eat mussels?
No.
Scallops?
No.
Clams?
No.
Oysters?
No.
I got a good one. Crab cakes.
I have tried crab cakes. Didn't like them, though, but I have tried it.
You didn't have the good ones then.
I tried it.
All right. What about like salmon?
No, my sister-in-law makes salmon. I have to sit in my room and light candles.
Wow. All right. That's crazy, but you're not the only one. The only seafood my wife will eat are like crab cakes and fish. You know, like regular fish, but all right. So if there's one thing that stands out to me early on, and Jacob, we can just go ahead and test this in a second, but it is the QB +3 that you mentioned. A lot of that. But hold on. If we scroll up to some of these Sam Darnold lineups, QB +2 for Darnold, QB +2, QB +2. Are we all the way at the top, Jacob? Because I'm just wondering, are there any QB plus threes for Sam Darnold? My guess is I see one right there.
The third Minnesota lineup there has Darnold, Aaron Jones, Justin Jefferson, and Jordan Addison.
So my guess then would be that the QB plus threes for Minnesota are going to include Aaron Jones.
Yes. And we did just get, this is as of 20 minutes ago, right before we started the show, that Aaron Jones, he's expected to play. I think the wording was he's very likely to play on Sunday. So it seems like the injury is a non-issue.
Yeah. Is it a non-issue, or does he just split with Ty Chandler? That worries me a bit, because they've been very willing to use Ty Chandler in that backfield. They also say that it has nothing to do with it, but they just signed Cam Akers back to the team as well.
Traded for, which also super weird to me. They traded a draft pick for Cam Akers last year. Then they cut him and he goes to a different team. And they traded a draft pick for him again.
Would they trade like a seventh or something?
Yeah, it wasn't a high draft pick, but still, it's it seems like a weird way to burn a draft pick when you could have just had him.
Yeah, for sure. Somebody said Geno yuck or something like that. It might have been Rance. I will say the spot for Geno is actually really interesting, because this is an Atlanta team that can't get pressure. And if you look at the difference between Geno Smith when he is pressured and when he's in a clean pocket, it's crazy. It's crazy. Go look at the numbers on Geno in a clean pocket and under pressure. Under pressure, he's been one of the worst quarterbacks in the league. With a clean pocket, he has been by far a top 5 quarterback. One of the most accurate, one of the best quarterbacks with a clean pocket. The Atlanta Falcons are dead last in sacks with 5 sacks this year. They have one of the worst pressure rates in football. Pass rush win rates is towards the bottom of the league. If there were a spot that really shoots out where Geno has time, because listen, they have good secondary, they have particularly good safeties, but Geno's really accurate with a clean pocket. I wouldn't sleep on this spot at all.
The other thing too, and this is kind of like the football game for Thursday night, it sucked. It was a terrible football game, and Alvin Kamara ended up being in the winning lineup yesterday, even though he sucked. But part of it too is just the volume and how important that could be for DFS purposes. And it's not an exact comparison, because last night was also where it was just the Saints did nothing the entire game. And so Alvin Kamara scoring whatever it was, 8.7 fantasy points, it was enough for him to be in the optimal lineup. But the point there is that there was so much volume that went to Kamara that he was able to score some fantasy points no matter how inefficient he was. He had 13 touches for 20 yards or something ridiculous. You and I were talking about it before the show. How it relates to Geno Smith, look at the volume that Geno Smith is allowed to throw the football at each week. He has had at least 34 pass attempts in every single week since week 2. And if you look at the last few games against the 49ers, 52 pass attempts. Against the Giants, 40 pass attempts. Against the Lions, 56 pass attempts. And then you have the 34 pass attempts against Miami, even though they won that game 24-3, so they didn't even need to throw the football. He still throws it 34 times. And then against the Patriots, 44 pass attempts. That's so much volume, and he's not overly expensive, that it's pretty easy to see how there's upside for him and what's a good matchup on paper.
Yeah, there's a ton of upside there. He's throwing a ton, and again, Atlanta does have a good secondary from a coverage standpoint, but if you're not getting pressured, that really is where Geno thrives. And you're talking about a high pass, right? You mentioned it. S&P and chat mentioned it as well. Yeah. It's just one of those spots that you're going to want to get to, at least in some capacity. We can go over in just a second, Jacob, to look at exposures here, stack exposures first. But think about some of these guys on the slate, right? Jaden Daniels against Carolina. They have a 30-point total or whatever it is. Hurts against the Giants. I don't know. I didn't see if I have any Jalen Hurts, but he's always viable. Third highest price quarterback. Stroud against Green Bay. But then you get to Love against Houston, sub 7K. You have Jared Goff against Minnesota. You have Kirk Cousins against Seattle. Sam Darnold in that spot with no Aiden Hutchinson against Detroit. And then Geno Smith is down there. Andy Dalton is down there. For only 10 games, there's a lot of quality quarterbacks and a lot of these guys that are probably a little bit underpriced as well.
One other thing that's interesting about these quarterbacks, they seem pretty concentrated. Like we're getting Atlanta, we're getting Washington, we're getting Minnesota. I see there's one Miami lineup in there, but quarterback position, it's not really a wide diversity of QBs that we're getting to
at all. Let's go to let's look at our stack exposures, Jacob, and see how these pop up. All right, so this is 25 to first, 10,000 on the contest run. Okay, and by the way, you guys want access to these tools: single lineup sim, contest simulator, pre-contest simulator, post-lock simulator, where you can simulate all of the lineups. Sorry, post-contest after the games are played to see how you did as far as simmed lineups goes, what the best lineups looked like, and how they simmed out. Late swap as well. You want to get access to any of that stuff? I should mention it now because it's Friday, and this will give you ample time to get your foot in the door and prepare yourself and play around with all the tools: ownership, player projections, top stack tool, boom bust, premium Discord, all of the tools that we use here on the shows. If you look at that link in the description, the first one, Jacob can throw it in the chat as well. Sign up on any of those sports books or pick'em sites using the links, that claim now link right there on the page, on that landing page. So you click that, you end up there. You'll see all of them, like Bet365. You sign up, you deposit 10, bet 5, get 200 in bonus bets, and a free month of our core package for any sport you want. That's $100 value. If you did it for BetMGM and Caesars and Bet365, now you have 3 months, which means like, all right, give me 2 months of NFL, give me a month of NBA. You can legitimately stack these core packages as far as you can go, so long as you aren't already on those sports books. It's pretty amazing. Just follow the steps at the top of that, and you've got our tools for free. All you have to do, pay close attention. With that link, click any of those. By the way, you're getting great bonuses on all of them as well, on top of getting the core package for free. That's just going to make you better lineups and a better DFS player. Do that, sign up, deposit, and then bet their minimum on the deposit. After that bet settles, it can be anything. It doesn't matter what it is, win or lose. Email us at support@Stochastic.com with your welcome email from that site. This is just so we can track it and make sure that you use the link provided and your first settled bet. That's all there is to it, Greg. You could be we had a guy stack 6 of them the other day. Has 6 months of core. We did.
Covers them for the rest of the NFL season, pretty much. I mean, you've got November, December, January. Yeah, covers him for more than the NFL season. He's halfway through the start of next NFL season.
He can get basketball too. It's a pretty amazing thing. But also on top of that, you're looking like, let's say you signed up on 6 of them. Let's say 4 of them. Minimum deposit, probably like say $5 or $10. You're talking $25, $40, whatever it may be, depending. 4 of those is $400 worth of Stochastic core Sims packages. So it's a straight no-brainer. Plus all the bonus bets you're getting on those sites. You got to be 21 years or older. If you have a gambling problem, call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. But keep in mind, even if you're in non-legal gambling states, all of the pick'em sites that we have on that page are included. Oh, and one more thing, because we're about to dig in. Greg, $1 for all of our NBA stuff, leading up to all the way up to the 29th of October?
Yep. And it doesn't matter if you sign up today. Doesn't matter if you sign up tomorrow. Doesn't matter if you wait until next week. You're going to get access to our NBA tools for just $1 through October 29th. So there's no real reason for you guys to wait if you wanted to sign up now just to check out what our tools are in projections for the first slate of the year, expected to be going up this afternoon. So we just wanted to have it open for everybody so that if you had any questions, if you hadn't used our tools before, you're able to check it out a few days in advance and let us know. And there's no penalty for signing up early. It's not like you get a week and then you have 3 days where there's no basketball that is going to take up some of those days. So no matter which day you sign up, you get access for $1 to our Sims, to our single lineup Sims, our NBA player projections, ownership, all that for just $1. Promo code is TIPOFF24, but if you use the link down below in the YouTube description box, the link's already loaded in there.
Yeah, you don't need the promo code. But either way, we got some great promos, great stuff going on right now. If you want to be a part of it, get access to tools that are going to make you a better player and understand the game a whole lot better. That's the way to do it. And jump in the Discord if you have questions. Jump in anyway. Join the community. It's going to be super helpful. All right, so Jaden Daniels, 19% total. No triple stacks there, which makes sense. He's a rushing quarterback. Gino, we've got a lot of single and double stacks, trace amounts of the 3-man stacks. And then can we do this, Jacob? Can you sort by QB +2? Daniels, Darnold. Okay, I figured. And I figure those 3% +3 is with Aaron Jones as well. I have a tough time believing that it's like Johnny Mund in there with Addison and Jefferson, especially with Hawkinson possibly returning.
Yeah, I think we still have Hawkinson projected out. That one's very much up in the air whether he's going to end up playing or not. And then even if he does play, what his role is going to be. Torn ACL, first game of the year, stands to reason to me that even if he plays, he'd be somewhat limited. Now, what that means is I wouldn't want to roster Hawkinson if he comes back, but I don't want to play Johnny Mund if Hawkinson's back either, because then it's just they're probably splitting the workload at tight end.
Very little Jalen Hurts, very little Aiden O'Connell. I mean, that's probably a good thing. Although the Rams are bad enough defensively in that secondary that Aiden O'Connell having a decent game wouldn't be the craziest thing I've ever seen. I still don't anticipate getting to a ton. Very little Mahomes, very little, essentially zero of these guys would be the better way to put it. Very little Stroud, a little bit of Jordan Love, 5% Daniel Jones, and it looks like most of this exposure is consumed by Daniels, Darnold, Cousins, Smith, and Dalton. Like I said, I don't even hate that. Would you try and smooth it out a little bit more, or would you be okay going into a slate with these exposures on 150?
I'd be pretty good with that. Could you go to so there's a couple of guys that I'm kind of answering your question both ways. I would be okay with it. However, there's a couple of quarterbacks, actually one in particular we're not getting any exposure to really, that I think has upside. And
can I guess?
You could probably guess it right. There's two guys I mentioned on Wednesday. Those are the guys that I want a little more of.
One of them's probably Richardson, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you go to just check our QB exposures outside of the stack exposures, Jacob. Yeah, you'll see we only have exposure to 5 quarterbacks. I mean, like a lineup or two with some other guys.
Yeah,
but
that doesn't count. Yeah.
In terms of guys we actually have meaningful exposure to, it's 5 QBs. Jaden Daniels, Geno Smith, Andy Dalton, Kirk Cousins, Sam Darnold. And I don't need to have exposure to like all of the quarterbacks or all the teams on the slate. But the two guys that I would want to boost to get a little bit more of, one of them is Anthony Richardson. We're really not that far removed from Anthony Richardson being a very popular play on pretty much any slate that he is on. And it's because of all the rushing upside he brings to the table. Like I would view Anthony Richardson as a pretty reasonable pivot off of a very chalky Jaden Daniels. And he's in a good matchup against the Miami Dolphins is Richardson. So some Richardson, either potentially even naked with him or single stacks. I think that is a stack that has upside that none of the field is really on. And the other one, Patrick Mahomes to Travis Kelce. It's been a minute since Patrick Mahomes has had a massive game in the regular season, which it's kind of funny to me because people will look at Patrick Mahomes and they'll say, like, oh, look, he hasn't had a good game in forever, but like they discount his games in the playoffs for whatever reason. Like those games still matter to me. And I still believe that Patrick Mahomes has significant upside for both real life and fantasy purposes. We just haven't seen a ceiling game from him so far this year. But now if we get a big Patrick Mahomes game, one thing that's nice is we almost can know for sure that it's going to come with a big Travis Kelce game. He only has one guy to really throw the football to at this point, and it's at a position that's hard to fill. So I like Mahomes to Kelce stacks, and I like Anthony Richardson a little bit as well. Not that they would be guys that I want like 15% of or anything like that, but I would want to get like close to like 10-ish% of those guys to add them to the mix.
You always like Mahomes so much more than I do. It's funny. Like we're always on a different page with Mahomes. I can't bring myself to click. I mean, you have Kelce, but outside of that, there's nobody. Xavier Worthy's wildly overpriced. I mean, there's no way you could convince me to pay for Xavier Worthy at that price point. Even though he had 6 targets last game, I'm not even worried about the production as much as the salary there. Smith-Schuster, Watson, Hardman, like a lot of those guys won't even be out there. But I mean, how do you go Mahomes +2? You kind of just can't.
Which I like. I like that we know where the targets are going.
But why not? So why not just play Kelce then?
Because I still think there's he's Patrick Mahomes. I still think there's massive ceiling there. I mean, you look at Patrick Mahomes, he didn't finish with touchdowns last week, but he still threw for 331 yards. There's rushing upside. He typically has 4, 5, 6 rushing attempts. I'll actually say that maybe there is a little bit of upside in Juju Smith-Schuster. He was clearly the number one wide receiver for the Chiefs last game. He ended up having 8 targets. He got 7 of them for 130 yards. Not that he's like my highest priority play on the slate, and I think the most likely scenario is that he never replicates that. But we're not like it seems like a while ago, but we're only 2 years removed from Juju Smith-Schuster being on the Chiefs and being a guy who was targeted over 100 times and nearly 1,000 receiving yards. So I think that Juju Smith-Schuster has maybe a little bit of life to him. But yeah, my primary focus is just Patrick Mahomes to Travis Kelce.
Okay. I think what bothers me more about Mahomes is that he's just too expensive for me.
He's not cheap.
You got him priced up there with guys that have just been dominant from a fantasy perspective this season. Either way, I get it. I'm not a guy that I'm going to try and get more of, but I do understand it. I understand Richardson more, though. A hypothetical non-DFS question. Do you think if Richardson returns and has, 2 more ugly starts with turnovers and they lose, do you think Joe Flacco comes back in and start? I think he does.
I put up a poll during last week. I'm pulling it up right now, where I asked people who they think should be the starter the rest of the season for the Colts, Joe Flacco or Anthony Richardson.
Flacco had to have run away with that poll.
I'm pretty sure he did. But what happened is I left it up during the game, and then I think like it was really one-sided, and like Flacco threw an interception. All of a sudden, the votes came in the other way because people are so reactionary. Here it is. All right, yeah. So put this poll up. 70% of people said Joe Flacco, 30% said Anthony Richardson.
I'm not surprised.
There is definitely, I think this happens in football more so than any other sport. I think teams really try to cater to the fans and what the fans want. And if Anthony Richardson, to your point, was to have a couple of bad games and the fans are saying, we want Flacco, I think the team would probably respond to that and put Joe Flacco back in.
Yeah, you might be right. S&P said the correct and only answer is Richardson. Yeah, they're not winning. No, of course that roster can't win a Super Bowl at all. At all. But you still have to consider like they're 3-3 and they're live for the playoffs. They have to bring Richardson back now. For sure. For sure. But like if he's terrible and they just so happen to win one of the 2 games because they get lucky, I'm curious. Yeah, if Flacco was the best quarterback on the Browns last year, he was the backup. So far, he's been the best quarterback on the Colts as the backup. Browns never should have let him go.
Joe Flacco, well, I mean, I think they had to because Deshaun Watson asked for him to be let go, and like that team is just.
Did he really?
Yeah. Watson didn't want the competition.
Really?
I think that team is.
Well, he's proven himself well.
Well, I think that team is, they're just so financially tied to Deshaun Watson. They were doing anything they could that would potentially make him successful this year. And it clearly hasn't helped. It hasn't made any kind of difference. It's just given them one less option to take him out for. But this might seem far-fetched. Joe Flacco, is he like a top 12 quarterback or so right now? Because I think he probably is.
Yes. I've thought about this. He is.
Like I would have to go through all of the quarterbacks in the league. Like there's a very clear tier 1 of QBs, which is, like the Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, CJ Stroud. Like he's nowhere near that tier of players. But then there's like a second tier where it's a lot of players that are pretty tightly grouped together. Yeah. Like Baker Mayfield, who's been good this year. You got Geno Smith. Yeah. Like that's the kind of tier, like tier 2. I think Joe Flacco's right with those kind of guys.
It's more of an indictment on the talent below the upper echelon of quarterbacks than it is, Joe Flacco himself, but he's been good. You can't take that away from him. But it will be Anthony Richardson this week, assuming he has no setbacks. I get what you're saying against Miami. Plus, the Richardson interceptions can actually be a good thing for him. Him throwing a pick 6 out of the gate isn't the worst thing. It's actually good, at least for that game, because, then they're in the hole. Will be interesting to see what Jonathan Taylor's status is. Man, really a lot of questionable players right now. My guess is Jonathan Taylor's out. He would have to get in a real practice today. Didn't practice yesterday. Jordan Mason was limited yesterday. I mean, I kind of buried the lead at the beginning of the show because there's so many guys that are dealing with like legitimate Q tags. Devon Acham being another one, full practice participant. I'm just waiting for him at this point to get cleared. He's in the final stages. Aaron Jones, Brian Robinson, Devin Singletary. That's just running back.
Yeah. We did the show last week and there was almost no value. And like we talked about on Wednesday about how the value could change. Then all of a sudden you get to Sunday and it's like, oh my God, Rashad White is out. Bucky Irving's one of the top plays, not just of that slate, but of the entire year. And then he goes out and has a great fantasy game. It took us a minute to get to that great fantasy game. I'm not going to lie. I was a little bit nervous about what was good because I buy Bucky Irving in like 85% of lineups or something last week. But he ended up crushing relative to his price point. And you just never know if one of those guys is going to end up opening up between now and Sunday.
Something's got it. Something will open up. We don't know what, but there will be something. All right, so that's what we've got at quarterback. And the reason I say that, guys, with the injuries is just so we have an understanding when we go in to look at some of these running back and wide receiver exposures. We'll let you know. We have this guy in right now. We have this guy out. Things can change. But it still gives you a pretty good idea of what we can work with. Man, I wish Dobbins was on the slate, though, Greg, against Arizona. Guy's coming off 25 carries last week. He's been so good this year. He had 2 bad spots against really good defenses. Kansas City with a banged-up Justin Herbert, and then against Pittsburgh. So I've decided I'm just going to ladder him up to 110 rushing yards instead.
Okay. What odds are you getting on that?
Plus 450.
Okay.
It's really not that bad. He's gone for 130 twice already this season on 10 and 17 carries. Arizona's defense is falling apart by the day. So yeah, a little fun. Ladder plays to me, ladder plays are more fun than parlays
I agree.
Because at least you could, I could hit 2 of 3 or 2 of 4, even 1 of 3 rungs of a ladder play. And if you structure it right, you're still either breaking even or profitable. And if you hit 2 of 3 or 3 of 4, you don't have to get to the top. To me, I like it even more than a round robin because you're banking on one player's performance.
Yeah, I like the parlays that I like the most are actual NBA ones where I'm just betting on one player. Where you crushed with those when you had a beat on something. Yeah, so when it's something there actually used to be, I don't know if it's still going to be the case, but I'll let you guys in on something. FanDuel's same game parlays for NBA were totally broken last year because you could ladder a player's points with their 3-pointers where there's a clear correlation and they wouldn't recognize that. So it would be like Tyrese Halliburton. I remember a big one that I hit in the playoffs last year where Halliburton had a couple of bad games in a row. And then you could combine his threes with his points prop. So I remember there was one, I bet Tyrese Halliburton for 20 plus points, I think was the number. And then also over 3.5 threes and 20 plus points. It was 4-1 or 5-1 for him, but then went up to 9-1 when you combined him with the threes. And there's a clear correlation there. If he hits the threes, he was going to hit the points as well.
I remember you hit that. It was a really sharp bet. And he had been terrible leading up to that point. Yeah. But he was still shooting. He was just missing everything. So yes,
no, hopefully they didn't fix that this year because that's the most common sense one is if this guy's hit 3, there's no way to make threes and not score points.
Yep. By the way, you ever want to join me in Tails? Come join me, man. Come say hello. We've been having a fantastic time. Great season. Very profitable season over there. Yeah. You see it, join Tails by OddsShopper. Use NFL 24, 50% off your first week or your first month. That's less than $5 a week, less than 15 a month. Yeah, have some fun. Or use BOGO. Use BOGO. Get Ben and myself. Grab either one. Get the other one free for the entirety of the month. Ben and I have been crushing. Ben hit the anytime first time. He's been, I don't know what black magic he has right now, but his first touchdown plays, I don't even bet first touchdowns, but he hit another one on Javonte yesterday.
Yeah. Also, Ben also bets some of the most random things ever.
It's crazy.
And I've asked him, he won't reveal it to me, but I'm because he will bet on things that I don't even countries I don't even know exist. And he's betting he's the other day he bet on, it was a Gibraltar soccer game. How do you even know this game is happening?
Yeah, use BOGO. You'll love it because Ben has all the wild shit. I stick to NFL and NBA, and we seem to coexist quite well. All right, running back exposure. What do we have here? Let's take a guess. I haven't looked at mine, but I assume it's Aaron Jones at the top, along with actually, I don't know, Kyron. I'm looking now.
So
Wow,
it is,
37%
you are
true.
right on Aaron Jones. It's a little spread out past him, though. And this is actually where there are some differences between running the Sims for me when it's really top heavy versus Jacob running it still like somewhat top heavy, but a little bit flatter. I don't get, other than like Aaron Jones, I still get a lot of, but I actually come in underweight to a lot of the chalk at other positions like running back and wide receiver, with Aaron Jones being the one exception. And with the more top heavy payout, I get a lot more exposure to some contrarian options than what shows up here.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, I will say, I really like Kyron this week. It'll end up biting me in the ass, because it's, whenever you really like a player that much, it can go south. But here's the good thing. I have 25% of him on my run that's 10% the first on my Sims. Mm-hmm. I'd be very happy getting 25% Kyron. Would I like to get a little bit over the field there? Sure. But in no way, shape, or form do I lose because of a good Kyron game at that exposure.
Yeah. And Kyron Williams at $8,100. I think that here's something that could really change with him. If one or two more players gets ruled out and it's easier to spend up for him, he's going to show up in more lineups. Because I do think that if you could roster any running back on the slate and pricing was not an issue at all, Kyron Williams is the guy to play, but he's $8,100, and it is kind of hard to find the salary to fit him into some of those lineups. So Kyron Williams is like a like to play, but kind of hard to play at the same time. So it's hard, even if you're trying to force him in, it's kind of difficult as of right now to get much more than, say, like 20% of him.
It definitely becomes tougher to get that. He's expensive. If value opens up, do you think he just immediately becomes a more popular play? Or do you think, or what I was going to say though, or do you think he stays the same if two really good value running backs open up and people jam them and just go to more expensive wide receivers and stacks?
Yeah, so that's a good point. If there are like two or three value running backs that come into play, well, then you just are playing them at running back, and then you lose out a spot to roster Kyron. If it's only one value running back that opens up, then Kyron definitely becomes more popular. But if it's multiple of them, then they're taking up a handful of those lineup spots, and then Kyron's ownership probably stays the same or goes down a little bit. But if wide receiver value opens up, then then Kyron probably all of a sudden becomes like 30+% owned.
Nicholas Lynn, why so confident on Aaron Jones this week? Detroit has a good run D. I don't think losing one guy makes them that much worse against the rush. Yeah, I've been going back and forth on this, because for me, it's not just about their run defense. And also the Aiden Hutchinson thing, I'm not Aiden Hutchinson and run defense to me is kind of whatever. Like, those are things that you can plug those holes. It's more the pass rush that's the big concern. And at the end of the day, he is still just one guy. Is he arguably the best defensive player, best pass rusher in football? Yes, absolutely. He has been. Objectively, has been the best pass rusher in the league this year, according to any major, statistic that you would look at. So his absence is going to be, pretty well noted there. Aaron Jones is very involved in the passing game as well. What I look at, though, is that, like, if he plays but gets in, only limited practices, for a guy that is, has an injury history longer than a CVS receipt, is he going to really come back in full capacity when they actually like Ty Chandler? That's why I honestly may make some adjustments and flatten out, not like 50-50 projection between him and Chandler, but based on practice reports and based on what I hear throughout the next 2 days heading into Sunday, it is possible. And I'm not saying I'm doing it yet, because we don't have this information. So maybe you're watching this on Saturday, that I will make some adjustments if I think that Aaron Jones isn't going to get the same workload that he has been getting.
Yeah. Another thing to add to this as well is that if a team is scoring a lot of points, it benefits everybody on the offense. So this is a very hot, what's the total at this game at now?
Well, I think they have a 26.5 point total, but that was earlier in the week. You can check again.
Yeah. And the total for the game is, it's 50.5 is the total overall for the game, which is the second highest on the slate. The only one that's higher is the 51.5 point total in that Commanders-Panthers game. So this is a game that's expected to feature a lot of points, which means what? More pace, more plays, more touches for everybody. And then also, if you do have scenarios where the Vikings are getting down to, inside the red zone, well, somebody's going to score touchdowns. It also benefits Aaron Jones. Even if the passing game is where more of the yardage comes from, it's going to create potential scoring opportunities for Aaron Jones. So just the pace of that game and how many points the Vikings are expected to score, that in itself is going to benefit Aaron Jones. Now, by the time we get to Sunday, where I assume that more value is going to open up in other places and whatnot, I don't think I'll end up with Aaron Jones in more than half of my lineups, but I'm pretty confident he's going to be one of my more rostered running backs, if not my most rostered running back at the very least. It just might not be quite the 61% mark here.
What if he just ends up what if they end up saying limited practice and he looks like, would you project him for his typical workload? If the answer is yes, then you'll probably get a decent amount of him anyway.
Yeah. I wouldn't really have too much of an issue with that. It would be one thing if there was like a really big Ty Chandler game last week, but Chandler had 14 carries for 30 yards. So he was pretty inefficient. He had 2 catches for 9 yards overall for the year. Ty Chandler's only averaging 3.5 yards per carry. So with that being in mind, it's not like Chandler is crushed when Aaron Jones has been off the field. So I think Aaron Jones is going to be the guy for them as long as he ends up not having any setbacks with his hamstring. Based on the report we got this morning, it seems like it won't be an issue.
Another question from Nicholas, and I'm taking these because these are good things that we can answer that can help. Nicholas Lynn, why not hire on Gibbs Montgomery then? It's funny because Greg and we talked about this extensively last week, and I had said, I'm not really getting to those guys, and I'm actually perfectly okay not getting to those guys. The reason was pretty simple. The cannibalization there, like even though this projects to be a high-scoring game, what do you need out of them at these price points when you have other guys who are the clear leaders in their backfields? I mean, you look at last week, they scored 47 points. This is actually a great example, Greg. They scored, 42 points against Seattle, 47 against Dallas, and against Seattle, Gibbs had 19.8 DraftKings points. Against Dallas, he had 12.1. David Montgomery, again, mind you, they scored a combined 89 points in those games. David Montgomery had 15 and 21 respectively. So the ceiling games for them at these price points, Montgomery 6,600 on DraftKings, Gibbs 6,900. It's kind of tough even when they score a lot of points. There aren't only just a lot of mouths to feed in the passing game, but those two guys compete for touches on the ground as well. Do you want to have a 60 and maybe there's going to be a day where one of them just goes insane. Montgomery will have the 3 touchdown game or Gibbs will have the crazy 2 touchdown performance. But as Ben always says, he's not trying to play whack-a-mole with these situations. Like I already have to pick a running back that's going up against going up against a field of 10 other guys in that price range. With these guys, you have to do that, and then you have to get him to beat out the guy on his same team.
Also, a little bit of added context to last week. There was somebody who wanted to play Gibbs and Montgomery in the same lineup and didn't want to play Bijan Robinson. And that was also a big comparison point to us, which was we didn't think it was super likely that both of them would have big games. And then also we really liked Bijan Robinson last week. And Montgomery did end up being pretty good, but I think he still scored, 10 less fantasy points than Bijan Robinson or something like that last week. It might not have been 10, but it was still less. And Gibbs didn't have a very good game last week. I know there have been times this year where they both have had good games, but it's just not going to be all that likely. And it's hard to predict between the two of them as well, because it's going to end up being often which of them scores the touchdowns. Because we saw this last week, which you mentioned the workload and how they cut into each other. Well, David Montgomery had 12 carries for 80 yards. Gibbs had 12 carries for 63 yards. Montgomery ended up having the fantasy game that was good between the two because he got the goal line touches and scored 2 touchdowns. But you got from Jahmyr Gibbs, which was efficiency wise, it was pretty solid. 12 carries for 63 yards. It's over 5 yards per carry. Also had 3 catches for 28 yards. But the problem becomes if Montgomery's the one who scores the touchdowns, and then with both of them being pretty expensive, Gibbs just draws dead. And it's really unrealistic to expect both running backs on a team to each be able to score touchdowns. I just don't want to have to guess which of them scores between the two, because I think it's going to alternate week to week.
That's what I'm saying. And you're not just guessing that. You also have to decide on those guys and prioritize them over some of these other, Brian Robinson's against Carolina, right? The other running backs in that range. So, yeah, it's tough. Nicholas, thanks for the super chat, man. He said this is for, answering my question so in depth without a suit. Anytime there's a question I think can help everybody, or just provide context to kind of where the Sims are at or where Greg and I are at, even whether we're right or wrong at the end of the day, I'm happy to answer those. S&P, if Pollard plays 90+% of the snaps, it's hard for him not to project well just based on volume. Yeah, so at this rate, the question is, does Tony Pollard play 90% of the snaps with Tajay Spears being week to week? They have Chestnut. I don't think Chestnut would play a ton. I don't know if I'd project Pollard for 90%. I'd put him probably around like 75, 80, but on volume alone, he's probably a pretty decent play. I won't lie to you though, Greg. I do have some concerns that we see some similarities with like the Alvin Kamara type game yesterday, where Will Levis is just so bad that, because the weakness on the Buffalo defense is their ground game. But like, how worried are you about Will Levis and, an aging DeAndre Hopkins and a guy in Calvin Ridley who they can't get the ball within 15 feet of his catch radius? It could also be a game where Pollard, you guys do what you want. Throughout the week, I begin to get a little bit scared of Tony Pollard. I'm going to have some, but I don't want to be way over the field. Like if I'm with the field on Pollard, I'd be very, very content with being in that 19-20% range and not 40% Tony Pollard. But that's just me.
Do you know how many passing yards Will Levis is averaging per game this year?
Oh, it's got to be like 110. I mean, it's terrible.
139.
Yeah, it's horrible. Now, to be fair, one game he got hurt. But what did he have last week? 66 or 92 or something? Like
95. Yeah, he was on 27 pass attempts. He had 95 yards. Like that shouldn't be possible. Plus, he has the most brain dead turnovers you'll ever see in your entire life. Like I know we make fun of some of the interceptions that Anthony Richardson has had this year, and they've been like extremely awful. But at least once per week, Will Levis has just a baffling turnover where it's like, oh, look, for whatever reason, you just decide to turn around and throw the ball backwards, or it's like, it's crazy, but it happens every single week. He's got a great highlight reel going.
Remarkably, he's in the same conversation as Deshaun Watson with how bad both of them have been.
I can't put anybody in the conversation with Watson right now, just because Watson has also had an incredibly easy strength of schedule. And it still hasn't really mattered for him. Like, and it's not that Will Levis played the most difficult schedule, but it's not as easy as what Deshaun Watson has gone up against.
I hear you, S&P. I'm not even hating on Pollard. I think it's going to be necessary if you're playing a bunch of lineups to get to some. But like if I'm playing single entry and it doesn't have Tony Pollard in it, I'm perfectly okay with that too. I think this game could get kind of ugly. Maybe I'm wrong, but I did bet Buffalo at -8.5.
All right. Yeah. And also something that is kind of interesting that shows up. Here's one of the other differences with a really top heavy payout versus a little bit of a flatter payout. Chuba Hubbard is our second most roster running back. We get a ton of them here. Nearly 40% of Chuba Hubbard. I come in with running a top heavy payout. I get right around 20% of Chuba Hubbard. So I get pretty far underweight to the field on Hubbard running with a top heavy payout, as opposed to running it on 25% where we get Chuba Hubbard in a ton of lineups.
It is interesting. I ran it at 10% and I got 31% Chuba Hubbard, which is pretty much with the field. Yeah. The only running back right now that I'm getting significantly over the field on is there's two of them, Chuba Hubbard and Trey Sermon. Let's talk about Sermon for a second here, because I'm so unenthusiastic with him, and he's been so underwhelming. But he's still playing a lot of snaps, and he's still in a spot where they're probably going to be able to run the ball a lot. And now, he's played 59 and 60% of snaps in these 2 starts. I think you're the one that mentioned it on Wednesday. It's like, hey, look, this guy sucked on the ground, but still had 6 for 25 or whatever it was through the air and scored and ended up being fine. It just may be one of those games. And again, you have Isaac Guerrero at 6,600, while you have someone like Trey Sermon, who is still priced at 55. If Taylor's out, it's gross, but I actually think Sermon's a very, very strong, low-tier play in that 5,500 spot.
Yeah, particularly if the ownership stays where it is. It's a different conversation if he ends up being more popular. But if he's actually going to be contrarian, yeah, then I think he makes sense just based on volume. Like going back to the Thursday Night Football game, Alvin Kamara sucked last night. It would have been a good game for a main slate, but you actually needed him for last night's slate. To have the optimal lineup, you needed to have Alvin Kamara last night. He was in the first place lineup. He was terrible, but sometimes volume matters more than anything else. 2 weeks ago, Trey Sermon had 10 carries for 38 yards. He had 6 catches for 25 yards. Great running back play for the slate. He's cheap. He scores a touchdown where he has nearly 20 fantasy points at a cheap price point just because he touched the ball 16 times and got 6 targets in the game and hauled in all of them. The one big concern I have here that I'd really like to, if I could have any question answered about this Colts game, I would want to know, is Trey Sermon going to get passing game work? 6 targets, 6 catches 2 weeks ago. Last week starts in place of Jonathan Taylor, 0 targets.
Well, they were playing with the lead in one of those, and they were playing from behind in the other.
But still, in a game that's 20-17, like
Sure.
you'd think there'd be more than 0 targets.
Sure. Yeah, no, I get it. Someone said he's like Cam Akers, but worse. Yeah, the only difference is that Shane Steichen has shown a willingness to actually use these type of guys when Taylor is out, even if he's not good. Whereas Dario Agumbawale was actually really heavily used with Mixon being out and Damian Pierce being out. Any other running backs before we talk wide receivers and tight ends here? I think we're covering a lot, so this is good.
Yeah, no, I mean, the one other thing that I actually would add that makes the Trey Sermon thing even more confusing, even though the Colts ended up winning the game, they did come back to win in the fourth quarter. They were down 17-10, and they scored 10 points in the fourth quarter. So they were trailing for a lot of that game, and they still didn't throw the ball to Trey Sermon at all. So, I think there's upside here considering the workload he got 2 weeks ago, but I'm very confused by his pass game involvement.
I got it wrong. For some reason, I thought that maybe it was because I was watching Calvin Ridley on every play and not looking at the score. But yeah, so the one other guy I'll throw out there, James Cook, you expect to be back. I think there's a possibility. Bear with me here, Greg. What if James Cook just ends up being like the best contrarian option on the slate that nobody plays because they're just thinking about Ray Davis from the previous week, James Cook being out, Tennessee having, a decent run defense. What about the fact that they're almost double-digit favorites at home? And the last time they had a blowout win, James Cook went nuts against that Miami team. Not as much against Jacksonville, but they benched him in the second half because he was not needed. I'm not saying get a lot of him, but if I got 10% James Cook or so, I'd be okay with that, even at that price.
The problem I have with Cook, and he's relatively expensive at $7K this week. Ray Davis was so good that I think he's just earned himself a role, at least for this week. It's hard for me to see them just going like James Cook gets the majority. Well, I still think James Cook gets more touches than Ray Davis, but it's hard for me to see a scenario where Ray Davis just doesn't play any kind of role this week. He was awesome.
Also a concern that I have, but I'm not sure if it's unfounded or not, to be honest with you. He's still a rookie. They can still work him in. I probably lean more towards what you're saying in that James Cook clearly isn't a priority. But man, if he ends up being the guy that's getting the bulk of touches against that team as huge favorites, that could go a long way. Also, if Zamir White's out, Alexander Madison looks fine at 5,500. There will be some value. Just pay attention. Brian Robinson, another one that if he's healthy, I like him a lot. All right, let's take a look at wide receivers here. And shout out to the 530 of you hanging out with us right now. If you don't mind, Show us some love for the algo. Hit that thumbs up. Say something in chat. Subscribe. Leave a comment down below. Whatever it may be. Goes a long way. And remember, any tool you want, any month of core, any sport, that link in the description, just click it, follow the directions, sign up on a sportsbook, deposit, place a bet, and you've got it. Stack them for as many months as you want. I mean, by God, is there anything better out there right now? I'd say no. And, dollar for the first 4 or 5 days or whatever it is of basketball for a single dollar. That's down there too. Be smart. Drake London, a lot of him. Jalen Coker, that's going to come down. Some value. The only reason that's happening right now is because Dalton's so cheap and it opens up crazy lineups for Dalton. Do me a favor, Jacob. And Greg, analyze this for me. Go to lineups in the top left, and then go to the right next to salary under lineups. You'll see it where we filter on lineups by player. Keep going to the right. Left. Right. Yeah, that one with the 3 dots on lineups. Yeah, and then go to filter and then Dalton. Greg, I just want to see what you think of these Dalton lineups because we didn't look at them specifically.
Sure. Yeah, it is. It's all because of the price savings you're getting here, which you were alluding to before, where you've got Andy Dalton isn't all that expensive. It's also an overall good matchup. The game's expected to be very high scoring against Washington. Their defense is no good. But you got Andy Dalton. You've got Jalen Coker in a bunch of those lineups. I know a lot of people are going to be like, who is Jalen Coker? Yeah, reasonable question. I didn't know who the hell Jalen Coker was until recently as well. But on a slate that doesn't have a very widely available value, it's hard to find guys for cheap. Jalen Coker is the min price, and he's played a role for the Carolina Panthers since Adam Thielen got hurt. It's not a crazy role or anything like that, but 4 catches, 4 targets against the Bears for 68 yards. And last week against the Falcons, 3 targets, 3 catches for 30 yards. So you just look at those couple of games, and based on him getting those kinds of targets, we have him projected for, I think, is a pretty reasonable, right around 7 fantasy points. And because the value is so shitty as of Friday morning, we're doing this show, 7 fantasy points is enough to make him look like one of the better points per dollar value plays on the slate. It's not like there's some sort of insane projection on Coker. So you might look at it and be like, well, that's more exposure than I'm comfortable with. But then when you consider the targets he's gotten in recent games and how that equates to a 7 fantasy point projection, I think it's pretty reasonable. As far as these lineups themselves go, to your question, you've got Andy Dalton, you've got Jalen Coker, and on a slate where it's just really hard to get those salary savings, that's one way where you get correlation in a good game environment that enables you to pay up for actual guys we do want to be rostering.
Look at the one lineup that has a 130.4 simmed ROI, 130.4. Dalton, Jones, Chuba, Justin Jefferson, Drake London, Deontay Johnson, Colby Parkinson, Jalen Coker. And that's kind of what Greg was saying, but that's what Jalen Coker does for you in some of these lineups. Again, my guess is we have less of him once the slate rolls around. But it does open things up in a really significant way. Jacob, if you could go to the one that's 118.8, it's hard for me to see it. It's right on the bottom, but we have the bottom bar, the banner covering it up. Okay, right there, 118.9. So look at this one, Greg. Dalton, Kyron, Aaron Jones, Drake London, Deontay Johnson, Jalen Coker, Dalton Schultz, Chuba Hubbard. It's just a pretty loaded lineup in a lot of these because you're getting that discounted stack on Dalton.
Yeah. And then also, Nicholas Lynn in chat brings up a good point. He goes, the ownership on, well, not necessarily the exposure we get to Jalen Coker is going to come down when other value opens up. Yeah. There's not going to be less value on Sunday than there is now. And each additional piece of value that opens up, Jalen Coker will show up in progressively less lineups. So this is the most you're going to see of Jalen Coker for the entire week. But no matter what the scenario is, I don't mind having at least some lineups that have him in them. He's a flat min wide receiver who's getting some amount of targets.
Sure. Look, I don't like anything about Jalen Coker outside of the fact that he opens things up, and I already liked Andy Dalton. That's simple. Flip back to wide receivers for a second, Jacob. So Deontay, a lot of that game, a lot of the, Jefferson, Drake London, Ray, McLaurin, Mooney. man, look at that. A lot of Atlanta up top, a lot of Carolina, and that Atlanta-Seattle game, DK Metcalf, 14%. But it's dominated by four receivers right now on a Friday morning.
Yeah. London, Coker, Johnson, Jefferson. And one thing that I'll add to these other wide receivers, whereas Jalen Coker, I wouldn't be surprised if other value opens up and we get less of him come Sunday. The London, Johnson, and Jefferson ownership, that's not going anywhere. Those guys are going to be strong options no matter what. And in fact, the more value that opens up, it's even easier to get to guys, especially like Justin Jefferson, Drake London, or Deontay Johnson. London and Johnson kind of like in the upper mid-range, and then Justin Jefferson being one of the more expensive wide receivers on the slate. But yeah, those guys are only going to benefit from more value opening up.
EWWEE, I never know how to pronounce that. Would you rather have McLaurin run back or uncorrelated London? I don't care, honestly. I truly don't. That doesn't mean anything to me. Like, sure, the McLaurin run back is nice, but I'm not swapping out London to get to McLaurin if the lineup looks better.
Yeah. I mean, look at the difference in our exposures and projection here. We have Drake London showing up, and this is without us making any adjustments. This is just the Sims telling us these are the best lineups and the best options on the slate. Drake London shows up in 58% of lineups. McLaurin shows up in 17%. Both of them good options. Both of them players were overweight to the field too. McLaurin slightly so. London way overweight to the field too. Then in terms of projection, 15.5 for McLaurin, 18.5 for Drake London, a 3 fantasy point difference. More often than not, the answer is going to be Drake London for me there.
Nicholas said, Laffy, what about your favorite guy, Jatavian? Hey, if you had Jatavian last week, you would have been happy. Looks like Tommy Tremble's going to be back, so I'd say no. I don't feel like trying to sort through Ian Thomas, Tommy Tremble, and Jatavian Sanders. Last week gave us a good spot for that. If there's no any other receivers you want to hit on, because the only thing for me is that we're not getting, it looks like not a lot of Amon-Ra, not a lot of Jamar Chase. Can you scroll down, Jacob? Are we getting any AJ Brown, Chase, or Amon-Ra? There's Amon-Ra at 7%. Okay. Jamar Chase at 1%. No AJ Brown.
The one thing I would add is I don't hate Elijah Moore as a value option now that Amari Cooper is gone in Cleveland. I know Deshaun Watson's quarterback. I know the passing game has been terrible, but at $3,200, I mean, we're considering Jalen Coker right here. It's not that crazy that you can get Elijah Moore. You get 5 or 6 targets with Cooper gone. Sure.
Yeah, and we're getting 4% Jerry Jeudy. Fine with that. A little bit of Addison. What about tight end? Is it Kelsey? Is it Bowers? Is it just dirt cheap guys? Is it all Colby Parkinson? Yeah. Very okay with Parkinson and Hurts. There you go, Nicholas. We do have 7% Jatavian Sanders.
Yeah, 7% Sanders. Yeah, the only guy that's really showing up a lot is Colby Parkinson. But yeah, if we're looking to punt a tight end, the guy who's showing up the most there is Theo Johnson. And he's somebody who I've mixed into lineups a little bit this year. Lofty, you had talked me into him at the start of the year, primarily just because his athletic metrics are so off the charts in terms of what he did in the combine. You got a guy who's really, really cheap, and who knows what actually he ends up amounting to in his NFL career, but he's such a good athlete, especially for a tight end, that I think that in itself creates a little bit of upside. And we've seen signs of that in recent weeks, not to where he's a guy who's gone out and put up, like tight end 1 numbers or anything like that, but a cheap tight end who's able to have games like 5 catches for 48 yards against the Seahawks, or last week against the Bengals, 3 for 30 yards. Like, these are serviceable games at a tight end position that hasn't been all that strong this season. The one guy we aren't getting a ton of, although we are overweight to the field to him that I want to boost a little bit more, it would be Travis Kelce for me. I think Kelce is back now that Rashee Rice is gone. The targets are all the way back for Kelce, and I don't think it's a coincidence that they came as soon as Rashee Rice got hurt.
It's not a coincidence at all. It's just a price point thing. Like, if you're paying up at tight end, you're paying down elsewhere, but that makes for a unique build. I don't think a ton of people are going to do it this week, honestly. Like, he's getting sub 10%. Bowers is getting 10%. Outside of that, not a lot of ownership going to these expensive guys. By the way, Theo Johnson, I like to think, I want to believe that I was early on him, that we're going to start seeing some decent games. We'll see. I don't know. Maybe not. Malik Neighbors is coming back. but he did play 89% of snaps last week, season high. So they're not giving up on him. So I don't have a problem getting 14% of him, 15% of Ertz. Parkinson, that's up there. But, Grant Calcaterra with Goddard not expected to play. Noah Fant. Sometimes it's good to just mix and match these cheap guys. We've seen how bad the tight end position was or is.
Yeah, and even you think you have confidence in some of these guys. Like I remember there was, 2 or 3 weeks ago where I was like, oh, Brock Bowers is the guy at tight end. He's the next Travis Kelce sort of guy. And I'd really bought into Brock Bowers being a guy that I wanted to load up on as a pay up tight end. I think that was after week 2. And then he had 3 catches for 41 yards against the Panthers. Then he had 2 catches for 19 yards against the Browns. He followed that back up with 2 more good games. But Brock Bowers is going to have ceiling games, but he's not like as safe as prime Travis Kelce or anything like that, where like he couldn't miss.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot different than that. Wokey asks, we can close with this. It's a good question. Is it ever smart to take a cheap tight end and then flex a good tight end? Absolutely. Yes. I mean, generally speaking, that's going to happen on slates where there's not a lot of value. So you'd see like, if you want to use Travis Kelce, for example, sure. Like a Kelce and Parkinson, or last week, were there any good expensive tight end plays last week?
Bowers.
Right. So, okay, Bowers and then a Jatavian Sanders, like that lineup would have played quite well. So yeah, it is very, very, I don't think there's a topic that Greg and I have covered more than this on this specific show over the last season and a half. It's the most slate specific thing you're going to come across when it comes to week over week. Like 1 tight end or 2 tight end is so specific to what you're given on the slate.
Yeah, and I mean, look at the numbers we have right here, where this is the most tight end exposure we've had on any show so far this year. Just like quickly adding up these numbers, 34% Parkinson, the 17% Bowers all the way down. That's about 150% tight end exposure, which means that of the lineups we built right now, about half of our top 150 lineups are double tight end lineups.
Okay. Yeah, because the only good value is Jalen Coker, and I don't even know if he's good value. So, yeah. That's what it's coming down to. But I bet you, I mean, this as well as I do. If today and tomorrow we get news that there's 3 or 4 guys ruled out and they open up these 4 and 5K value options, watch that come down to like 115% or something like that from 150.
Yeah. If you start to all of a sudden see, Aaron Jones unexpectedly ruled out or anything along those lines where there are other cheap plays that open up, then immediately those tight ends, to your point, it goes from being 150% line exposure to the tight end position, probably like 110 or 115%.
Anything else before we jump out of here?
No, that about does it. NBA is going to be starting on Tuesday. If you guys are looking for NBA content, Josh and I did a first look at the initial pricing, talked about our deals for the upcoming year. Going to have new educational content coming out soon on all of our new NBA tools that we have for this season. So be on the lookout for that if you guys are going to be playing NBA. And if you are going to sign up, take advantage of that $1 promo, just $1 to get exposure to our NBA core package through October 29th.
Hell yeah, man. Hey, hopefully this is helpful as always. You guys ever have questions, hit Greg or myself up. Obviously, if you're subbed, hit us up in the Discord. If you have questions about anything else, DMs are open on Twitter as well. Just probably potentially a longer response time sometimes, but we try and do our best to get to those. Are you still answering questions in Discord for people who have questions about just the tools, sims, and game theory, strategy in general? Because that goes a long way.
Yep. And also starting on Tuesday with the first NBA slate, I'm going to be in Discord every single day doing scheduled office hours, 1:30 p.m. Eastern time to 2:30 p.m. Eastern time. And I'll answer anything from questions about, it doesn't have to be basketball. It's planned around the NBA injury report just because that's when people are going to have the most questions about slate specific stuff as guys get ruled out. So right after that injury report drops at 1:30, I'm going to be in Discord and I'll answer any questions about specific NBA slates, but we could also talk about football slates, whether it's the main slates or showdowns, talk about tools, how things work, any kind of strategies I'm going to be implementing on specific slates. So Monday through Friday, starting on Tuesday, every day, 1:30 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern time.
Now, can you just change your Discord name to Greg Ehrenberg instead of Ehrenberg Greg? I was trying to help somebody find you on Discord through Twitter because they had questions. So I can't find the guy. And then finally, I took a shot in the dark and it's Ehrenberg Greg.
I don't know. Does it allow me to change it?
I hope so. Anyway, we'll work on that. We'll see you back here for Sunday. It all culminates with a 4-hour live, probably longer because we got the showdown for London, true barn burner between the Patriots and the Jacksonville Jaguars. We'll have the showdown live before lock for that, and then 3.5 straight hours of coverage for the main slate all the way up to 1 p.m. Until next time, bye-bye.